Now, the COP28 Climate Summit being held in Dubai witnessed a historic moment as nearly 200 nations, in a rare display of unity, agreed to transition away from fossil fuels. Overcoming challenges and late-night negotiations, the nations set ambitious targets calling for a just and orderly shift towards net zero emissions by 2050. Take a look at this next report for more.
Hearing no objection, it is so decided.
COP28 Climate Summit nations on Wednesday agreed to a deal to, quote, transition away from fossil fuels, which scientists say is the last best hope to avert climate catastrophe. The historic deal was struck by nearly 200 countries gathered for the conference. It marks the first time in 3 decades of COP climate summits that nations have agreed on a concerted move away from oil, gas, and coal, which account for about 80% of global energy. The future role of fossil fuels has by far been the most contentious issue at the 2-week COP28 summit in Dubai. Negotiations had faced resistance from members of the OPEC oil producer group and its allies, especially Saudi Arabia, according to sources familiar with the discussions. And an earlier draft was criticized by scores of countries for failing to call for a, quote, phase-out of fossil fuels. The new draft came after overtime negotiations at the conference stretched late into the early hours of Wednesday morning. The deal calls for, quote, transitioning away from fossil fuels and energy systems in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, so as to achieve net zero by 2050 in keeping with the science. It also calls for a global tripling of renewable energy capacity by 2030, speeding up efforts to reduce coal and accelerating technologies such as carbon capture and storage that can clean up sectors difficult to decarbonize. Deals struck at UN climate summits must be passed by consensus, at which point individual countries are responsible for executing on the agreements.